For more than 10 years, the planet Tyrellin had suffered in silence. Once a thriving world with crystal towers, peaceful gardens, and a proud seat in the Galactic Accord, it now lay beneath the shadows of the Vorak swarm giant insect-like. Creatures that moved like a plague across the stars, devouring everything in their path. The Accord, the alliance Tyrellin trusted for protection, had failed them. Instead of fighting, the Accord leaders closed the jump gates, claimed it was a matter of containment, and left Tyrellin to face the horror alone. At first, the people believed help would come. They waited. They fought. But as cities fell and skyports turned into hatching chambers for Vorak queens, that hope began to die. The brave defenders were either consumed or forced into hiding. Communication. Towers went dark. Entire regions became silent fields of ash. Deep beneath the ruined capital, in an old emergency shelter once used for school drills, Speaker Vale, the youngest ever appointed to the Terraloni Council, sat beside a flickering console. Her voice, quiet but steady, echoed into a recorder, patched together from broken parts. "If anyone finds this," she said, her eyes reflecting dim light, "know that Tyrellin resisted. That even when no one answered, we remembered how to hope. And if the stars forget us, let memory be our rebellion." She sent the message not to call for rescue, but so that someone someday might remember that Tyrellin was not just another lost world. Unseen by her, far beyond the blackened moons and forgotten relay towers, a human deep space probe picked up her signal. On a station hidden in the Kuiper shadows beyond Pluto, a monitor blinked. A Terran operator, surprised to see. An Accord-level distress call on a dead channel forwarded it up the chain. And somewhere, deep within Earth's classified networks, a program flagged the transmission with a single note: survivors detected. Non-Accord world, human decision required. Humanity, long removed from galactic politics, had chosen silence. They remembered well the days when they were abandoned too. But now, hearing that cry through the dust of stars, they stirred. Not with noise, not with promises, but with quiet preparation. For while others turned their backs on Tyrellin, humanity had not forgotten what it meant to be alone and what it meant to rise. And though Speaker Vale could not know it yet, her final message had reached ears willing to listen, and hands ready to act dot in the cold, dark stretch of space beyond the borders of the Galactic Accord. The Terran Deepwatch station, called Omen's Edge, floated in silence, watching the void with sensors that had not picked up anything significant in years. The station, once part of Earth's early defense grid, had become a forgotten outpost after humanity withdrew from galactic politics following the Unity collapse, a betrayal that shattered trust between Earth and its allies. But while Earth stepped away from diplomacy, they never stopped listening. One quiet morning cycle, a signal flickered across the outer channels, a dying call, weak and broken, laced with static and dust. It carried the voice of a young woman from a distant world, speaking not for help, but to be remembered. Commander Arden Voss, once a war hero and now a monitor in exile, heard the message. His hand froze above the controls as the voice spoke. Of cities falling, people hiding, and hope holding on by its last breath. Something deep inside him stirred, not pity, not duty, but anger. Earth had been forgotten once, surrounded by silence when it needed the galaxy most. Arden remembered watching orbital fires from Earth's skies as allies abandoned them. But they had survived, rebuilt, and vowed never to leave others behind as they had once been. Voss stood from his console, sent the signal to Terran High Command, and waited. The Council, safe and distant, hesitated. They debated politics, consequences, optics. But in the dark corners of the Terran fleet, others had already seen the message: veterans, outcasts, engineers, warriors who called themselves the Voidwalkers. They weren't tied to government or law. They followed an older rule: protect the broken, punish the wicked, never let another call go unanswered. Without waiting for permission, they gathered in old hangars and powered up warships with scars. Older than most empires, their jump drives lit up the void like silent thunder. Ships of all shapes, marked with Terran banners and mission patches from forgotten battles, formed around the flagship Reckoner. Their crews were not soldiers of empire. They were soldiers of memory. They trained not just in combat, but in how to rebuild, to shield, to guide. Each of them remembered what it meant to stand alone, and now flew toward a world they had never seen. Tyrellan's name was barely known to them, just a whisper from the edge of space, but that whisper was enough. As they crossed into uncharted sectors, Vorak tracking sensors picked up movement strange, sudden, sharp. The swarm turned its many eyes toward the stars, but they could not understand what approached. The Voidwalkers didn't send threats. They sent coordinates. They didn't promise help. They arrived without warning. And above all, they carried with them a vow not written in law or spoken in public, but carved into every Terran heart. No one gets left behind again. Far below, under the broken skies of Tyrellan, Speaker Vale still believed no one had heard her cry. But across the stars, ships older than memory were already burning through the dark to prove her wrong. Speaker Vale stood near the last defense line of the central sanctuary, her hands shaking as she passed out weapons to the few brave Tyrelloni who remained. The Vorak hives had grown stronger by the hour, swarming with their endless drones, and no outside help had come in years. But just as she braced herself for what felt like a final stand, the air changed. A deep, low rumble echoed across the skies, unnatural and rising in power until it became something more than sound. It became a roar of justice. The clouds, once blackened with ash and hive towers, split apart as white-hot trails of light pierced through them. What followed was awe. Silver-armored dropships diving from orbit in perfect formation, followed by precision strikes from above orbital rail cannons hammering Vorak strongholds with silent fire. The ground trembled. The enemy panicked. Humanity had arrived not as diplomats, not as explorers, but as guardians. The Terran exotroopers, equipped with AI-targeting systems and battlesuits that moved with mechanical grace, landed in perfect sync. They didn't waste a second. Their mission was clear: remove the threat, protect the innocent. While Tyrellan's people watched in disbelief, the soldiers moved like lightning, disabling Vorak command nodes and fuel chambers with surgical precision. Every shot mattered. Every strike sent the swarm reeling. The Vorak, long dominant in the skies, attempted to regroup, but the humans had thought of everything. Gravity suppression fields locked down aerial units mid-flight, dragging them out of the air like falling stones. It was like nothing Tyrellan had ever seen. War fought not for conquest, but for rescue. Vale, stunned, dropped her weapon as she watched the impossible unfold. Then came another miracle. Terrelloni fighter craft, long buried or hidden, launched into the air to support the Terrans. Brave pilots who had hidden their ships for years now soared into battle, flying alongside. Humans as if they'd trained together for a lifetime. It was not just a battle anymore, it was a turning point. The message was clear, painted across every moment of fire and unity. Earth had not disappeared. It had grown stronger in silence, waiting for the moment to return, not to lead, not to dominate, but to remind the galaxy that it had not forgotten how to stand for others. On the surface, families hiding in caves stepped into the light to watch strange ships fight for them. Children pointed at Terran banners and smiled for the first time in seasons. Resistance leaders, who had nearly given up hope, now found themselves flanked by armored giants who spoke gently, fought fiercely, and carried the weight of promises kept. As the battle raged into the night, The Vorak command structure cracked. Their hives, once unbreakable, collapsed in blue flame and ruin. Human medics arrived minutes behind the front lines, patching wounds and helping Tyrelloni civilians evacuate. There was no demand for thanks, no speeches, only swift, silent aid and eyes that carried memories of their own old wars. And as dawn broke over the hills of Tyrellon for the first time without fire in years, the people of the planet realized they were not alone. Across the galaxy, listening posts picked up faint signals from Tyrellon, human call signs, victory, reports, and a single phrase repeated in countless dialects. They came back, not to conquer, to protect, because the silence was over, and humanity had broken the sky wide open. What happened on Tyrellon did not stay there. It moved like wildfire. Across space. The rescue was not just a victory. It was a signal, one the galaxy could not ignore. In distant systems where forgotten colonies still hid from the eyes of empires, weak signals began to pulse out into the void. Some came from children who had never known peace. Others came from rebels with only one working transmitter. And one by one, those signals were heard by humanity. The Terrans, still carrying the memory of being left behind themselves, responded not with fanfare or demands, but with action. Old ships rose from hidden hangars. Crews, trained in both combat and compassion, deployed with purpose. Each arrival brought not conquerors, but builders. Engineers replaced broken reactors. Medics healed the wounded, regardless of species. Children on dust-covered worlds saw schools rise where ruins had once stood, where galactic leaders saw poor colonies unworthy of investment. Humanity saw future allies. They didn't demand submission. They asked for trust. Soon, the first wave of liberated worlds gathered and formed something new. The Skyborn Pact. It was not ruled by Earth, but Earth stood at its heart. Membership was simple: any world, any race, willing to protect each other and uphold one law. No one gets left behind. From mining planets once controlled by pirates to peaceful moons once ignored by the Accord, banners began to rise, stars against a silver sky, the mark of the Skyborn. Even Tyrellon, now fully healed and defended, became a symbol of the movement's strength. They flew the banner proudly, the first non-human world to do so. Their people, once quiet, now spoke across galaxies of what it meant to be remembered. The Accord, seeing their influence slip away, attempted to slow the spread. They warned planets not to align with the humans. They called the Skyborn a rogue operation, but it was too late. The Accord had hesitated when help was needed. Now their silence had cost them everything, and in the shadows where the Vorak hive once ruled, the insectoid swarm began to scatter. Their queens had been slain, their hives crippled, but what frightened the Vorak most wasn't the technology of humanity. It was their will, their refusal to leave others behind, their ability to turn victims into defenders and broken ground into home again. On distant worlds, people began looking to the sky not with fear, but with hope, because everywhere stories began to grow. Simple stories, powerful stories, stories that started the same way. One night the sky cracked open, and out of the fire came light. Ships flew not to dominate, but to defend. Soldiers fought not to rule, but to lift up. And in every liberated system, a message was left behind in every known language. We are Skyborn now. We heard your signal. We answered it. And in quiet corners of the stars, where despair had once been the only truth, the fire kept spreading. Years passed, and Tyrellon was no longer a name whispered in sorrow. It had become a symbol of hope, rebuilt stronger than before, with cities that stretched into the skies and fields blooming with life once lost to war. Speaker Vale, now older and wiser, walked through a garden that had once been a battlefield. Children played where fire once fell, and laughter replaced the sound of alarms. She stood beside a young Terrelloni girl who looked up at the space station. Glowing above them, a station crafted not by one species but many, orbiting as a silent guardian above a world once forgotten. The child's voice broke the quiet, full of wonder as she asked, "Is that where the light came from?" Vale didn't hesitate. She smiled and answered gently, "No, the light came from those who refused to ignore the dark." That same light, now stretched across hundreds of worlds, each touched by the Skyborn Pact. The Terran fleet, though never the largest, had become something more powerful than numbers. It had become a promise, a symbol that wherever suffering was met with silence, someone would answer. On Earth, Commander Arden Voss returned home not to applause, but to the quiet task of shaping a future. He declined medals, interviews, and parades. Instead, he worked with diplomats and engineers, teachers and healers, writing what would become the founding doctrine of the Skyborn Pact. No silence shall go unanswered. Across the stars, that line echoed like a law written into the cosmos itself. And when darkness returned, as it always did, someone always remembered. Sometimes it was a small scout ship carrying aid to a hidden moon. Sometimes it was an old freighter suddenly blocking a warlord's fleet. And sometimes it was the unmistakable streak of Terran dropships breaking through clouds like bolts of living thunder. Enemies who once thought distant worlds could be, taken without resistance, found themselves facing fighters who did not run, civilians who refused to break, and the cold gaze of a Terran soldier who had heard their signal. The galaxy began to change, not through war, but through example. Old empires collapsed under their own cruelty. New alliances formed, not by treaties, but by trust. The Skyborn Pact grew, not as rulers, but as protectors, its strength not in fleets, but in belief. And on every planet that joined, from ice-covered colonies to jungle moons glowing with strange suns, one phrase became sacred: we break the silence. For Speaker Vale, the garden became a place of stories, where elders shared tales of a time before the light came, and children listened wide-eyed. On Earth, Voss retired quietly, planting a small tree beside a plaque that bore no name, just a symbol of a sky cracked open by hope. And in the deep reaches of space, far from any known route, a tiny signal pulsed a call for help from a mining station under siege. The message was weak, nearly lost in static, but someone heard it. Lights flickered in the command bay of a Terran cruiser. Coordinates locked. Engines roared. And once again, from a place beyond expectation, humanity rose. They didn't come with demands. They came with hands ready to lift, shields ready to protect, and fire only if needed. Because they were no longer just soldiers. They were skyborn. And wherever the sky darkened, they would answer.